Um, Welcome everybody to RISE Learning Machines seminars. I'm Olof Mogren. I'm a machine learning researcher here at RISE. RISE is Sweden's public research institute, and this is our open weekly seminar on AI and machine learning. Today's talk is a collaboration with Climate AI Nordics, a Nordic network with people working on AI to tackle climate impacts. This meeting will be recorded. Let us know if you want to be excluded from this recording. And also do check out the collection of great talks on our YouTube channel. For example, the talk by Julia, who's here in the audience today, was just published on the YouTube channel. Today, I'm introducing to you Lily Chu, who is currently a postdoctoral fellow at Oxford's Leverhulme Center for Nature Recovery. And she's starting as an assistant professor at Columbia University in the fall of 2025. She's the AI lead for the SMART partnership, supporting rangers in protected areas worldwide. And she's co-organizer of EAAMO, advancing equity and access in algorithms, mechanics, and optimization. She works across machine learning optimization and causal inference, and enables environmental decisions in low data, high uncertainty contexts, and focus on a robust, scalable, and future-oriented AI solutions. And the topic today is high-stakes decisions from low-quality data, AI decision-making for conservation. And with this said, I will hand over the word to you, Lily.
Thank you so much, Olaf, for the introduction and the invitation. It's very fun to be here and to meet some of the folks in your RISE group and the broader Nordic AI community. Yeah, I'm happy to keep this fairly conversational, so please feel free to interrupt at any point with questions or comments. With that, I'll get started. So I want to give a bit of recognition to the center that's currently funding me in my work. So the Leverhulme Center for Nature Recovery is a big multidisciplinary center based at Oxford. We're all focused on biodiversity. And we define nature recovery as the activity of helping life on Earth to thrive by repairing human relationships with the rest of the natural world. Um, and if we kind of break down this definition a little bit, helping life on Earth requires that we design interventions and take some action. Repairing human relationships means we have to understand human agents and what their incentives are, how to kind of respond, but also plan around their incentives because people will be strategic and oftentimes have competing interests. And we have to do this all kind of like in harmony with the rest of the natural world. But this also means that we're operating in dynamic environments that change as a response to our actions. So how do we, effectively move towards a world where we're moving towards nature recovery? And more importantly, how can AI help? Um, okay, so if we're thinking about actions for nature recovery, they might fall along one of three general areas. So one is monitoring. So this is asking questions like, what is the population of a certain species, like killer whales, that are actually data deficient? Like the IUCN Red List does not know what the population is. We don't have a good estimate. And we can also be monitoring for threats, like looking for trying to identify where illegal and unregulated fishing is happening, where logging or poaching is happening. So these are all monitoring tasks. There's planning tasks, which is in response to something that we've identified as as a problem or objective through our monitoring. How can we actually take action? So we might be trying to determine things like which lands maximize protections for snow leopards, and how do we do this type of planning under constraints such as a budget constraint. And finally, after we've taken some actions, we want to evaluate the impact of what we did. So we might want to ask questions like, do community managed areas reduce elephant poaching? And what I want to highlight is just looking at the current state of the world in terms of like where AI applications have been oriented when it comes to these types of biodiversity questions. So I especially because many people here, I believe, work in remote sensing. We know that like there's a significant and rapidly increasing amount of work on monitoring. So this includes computer vision to identify animals with camera traps, to identify land use and land cover change, and including bioacoustics, which Olaf, you said that your group is also working in. Um, so all of these are questions related to monitoring. And of course, there's more potential here. You know, we need to continue to improve these tools so that we are we're better able to process the vast amounts of data that is being collected to do so in a efficient, effective way that best helps inform decision making. But there's also a significant amount of AI methodology that can apply to planning and impact evaluation as well. And what the case that I want to make today is that these other types of AI tools outside of monitoring tasks are vastly underdeveloped. Given the state of research at the moment. So I think that there's a lot of potential and kind of like a lot of untapped potential to be taking the data and the monitoring that we already have presently and use that to better inform downstream decision making. So that's kind of the focus of what I'll talk about today. Um, and I'm calling this gap between like the current application versus the potential for planning and intervention design, the biodiversity decision gap, which is kind of a reference to the biodiversity finance gap in the global biodiversity framework, which states that we have a shortfall in 700 billion US dollars to achieve the all the objectives of the global biodiversity framework. Okay. Um, Another thing that I want to highlight related to all of this is, I think this audience knows it a little bit better than, most of you are computer scientists, than a more general audience, but we all know that AI is a very overloaded term and encompasses many, many different things. A lot of the monitoring work falls under this bucket of predictive learning, which is a lot of like supervised learning tasks, including computer vision, for example, that trying to take data and apply some kind of like label to it. And that label can either be, an identification of this is an animal or not, or some kind of prediction like, will there be illegal logging in this area, for example. But there's a lot of other work, a lot of other methodology in AI across planning and reasoning and uncertainty that I see as relatively underaddressed and underapplied to biodiversity tasks. And I also have this kind of area on the side of some research areas and some tools that are not traditionally AI, but are also very closely connected with AI. So this includes like the disciplines of economics and statistics, and also optimization and causal inference, where AI and has a lot to contribute to these, but they also really help inform AI methods. For example, economics and statistics underlie a lot of ideas in adaptive experimental design, in machine learning, and robust planning, for example. Um, and Oftentimes when we hear the news nowadays, when people talk about AI, they're really referring to generative modeling, and machine learning falls under kind of all these methodologies. So I just want to kind of use this to paint a picture of, what are we really talking about when we're talking about AI? And then the kind of AI I'll be focused more on today is really focused on this planning and reasoning area in the middle. Okay. So the general pipeline that we want to think about when we're moving towards decision making for something like nature recovery is we begin with data. We apply monitoring here to develop some model. And then we use planning tools to convert that model into some kind of decisions. And then we apply we apply impact evaluation in order to understand how good these decisions were. And I'm just kind of throwing in as like examples here some of the methodology that is relevant across these different tasks. And I'll be focused today on my work more downstream of along this pipeline. Okay, so I think this audience knows quite well that there's an increase in global attention towards biodiversity. And in 2022, we had kind of the biodiversity equivalent of the Paris Agreement, just 7 years later, where 196 nations around the world ratified the Global Biodiversity Framework, which agreed to 23 targets with the goal of halting and reversing biodiversity loss. And one of the hallmarks of the Global Biodiversity Framework is Target 3, which is colloquially known as 30 by 30, which is a goal to increase the amount of the world's protected lands and ocean to 30% by 2030. So this requires almost doubling the amount of protected lands and over tripling of the world's protected oceans. So it's a really dramatic commitment, and I want to flag that we're at this point only 5 years away. So there's a lot that we have to do quite urgently. But one challenge to protected areas is that there's kind of insufficient protection even within areas that have been designated as protected. So these are referred to as paper parks, where they're just kind of like, a boundary drawn on a map. But even though it's called a protected area, there's not really adequate like resources or money or personnel to actually effectively protect these landscapes. And a study from the Natural History Museum in October suggested that rates of wildlife decline are actually higher within protected areas than outside of protected areas. There's much that we need to do. And one of the biggest threats within protected area is poaching, which is the illegal hunt or capture of wild animals. And poaching is very rampant, including in Murchison Falls National Park, which is a big protected area in Uganda where this photo comes from. So this is an article from The Guardian showing a team of rangers in front of a mountain of snares that have been caught in a single calendar year in this one park. So every single one of these like small wire circles refers to a trap that was placed by poachers meant to catch animals. And all of the wire traps at the top of this mountain are wire snares meant to catch pigs and deer for mostly for bushmeat. And in the bottom are these big claw traps that are meant to catch larger game like elephant or buffalo. So poaching is extremely rampant in Murchison Falls. Ecologists have estimated the snare density as about 4 for every square kilometer in the park. And this is a vast 5,000 square kilometer park, so that's about 20,000 snares. But in this park, there's only 250 rangers available to patrol and protect this area. So there's a huge challenge of limited resources. And the question is, how can we better allocate these limited resources? And to just get a sense of like how difficult this problem is, here are 3 pictures of snares that have been detected in Murchison Falls. And even though they're like head-on shots, it's really, really hard to see exactly where the snare is. So I've highlighted in red exactly where these snares are. But this is just to understand kind of the difficulty of the challenge faced by rangers. Okay, so our objective here is thinking about how can we apply AI methodology to help better allocate these limited resources and more efficiently plan patrols. So what we begin with is the data that comes from Murchison Falls, where we have many, many years of historical data that's been collected on this platform known as SMART. And this work is in partnership with UWA, the Uganda Wildlife Authority. So here's a map of Murchison Falls where each little brown dot in this diagram indicates a GPS coordinate of a place that rangers have been over 6 years of patrols that are visualized here. And you can see that the historical patrol coverage is very imbalanced. So there are some areas that were patrolled very intensely, and there are some other areas that just like weren't patrolled at all, even in 6 years of data. And the question is, are there areas that might be poaching hotspots that rangers just haven't visited? Um, so along with these GPS locations that tell us like where rangers have been, we also have biodiversity monitoring signs like the location of elephants or observations of poaching, like this is where we found a snare or this is where we saw ashes from a poacher's campsite. And in order to make this data useful for machine learning approaches, we can process this data by discretizing the park. So we spatially break it up into 1 square kilometer regions. So that's every pixel corresponds with 1 square kilometer, and we break it up temporally into 1 month areas. So we can calculate for every month in one area, how much did rangers patrol, measured in terms of distance walked. So that gives us a sense of the amount of effort exerted in one area. And we can also pull out all the historical poaching activity that have been detected by rangers. And we add to this geospatial information that corresponds with signs of poaching threat. So we have human observation, human infrastructure, such as where the roads are, patrol posts, or the park boundary. We have the locations of landscape features, such as where water holes are, land cover, elevation, or the ruggedness of an area. And we also have dynamic information that comes from remote sensing that captures change over time. So this includes precipitation, temperature, and vegetation that lets us track seasonality and other considerations. And we can throw all this into a machine learning model to try to predict poaching in a future month for different areas across the park, including areas that we haven't visited previously. And I won't go into detail here, but the way we build up this approach is using an ensemble technique that is focused on addressing class imbalance, which where in this problem case, we have very significant imbalance in negative labels in that the majority of the areas have no observation of poaching. Um, but we can generate these risk maps for different future months to help inform ranger patrols. And we wanted to ensure that these models perform well, not just in terms of AUC, but also in being able to actually practically guide decision making on the ground. So we implemented a series of field tests in Murchison Falls to evaluate the quality of these predictions, where we sent rangers, well, we took our predictions and we pulled out a random subset of areas from all the areas that we detected to be at high risk poaching and also medium and low risk. Um, and asked rangers to patrol this for a 5 month period of time. And to keep this a valid experiment, we focused on areas that were infrequently patrolled in the past, so we weren't just relying on historical patterns. And we also kept it a blind experiment by not informing them of the risk classification in advance. So from there, rangers went on patrols for 5 months and shared back their data. And what we found is that they observed many more snares in areas that we predicted to be high risk of poaching than medium or low, indicating that our model is able to effectively discriminate poaching risk. And in subsequent tests where we are focused on high risk areas, they found over 1,000 snares in a patrol, which compares to a typical patrol where they find between 200 and 500 snares. So we were really excited about these results, and we were really encouraged to get this positive feedback from our collaborators. So Rohit Singh, who leads the Zero Poaching Initiative at WWF, said, "I'm very excited with these results. Let's expand." So a lot of what I spent my in partnership with SMART, which is a consortium of 8 different conservation NGOs that's focused on helping ranger patrols and informing protected area management. And SMART has they developed a phone app that is used by rangers to collect and record their patrol observations. And there's also kind of a companion desktop software used by managers to aggregate and make sense of this data. But Smart was just kind of like a database where you can visualize and query, but there was no prescriptive or predictive component. So we worked with them to integrate our predictions as a plugin into their software so that this tool will be available to other protected areas. And kind of meeting them where they are. So not requiring them to learn kind of additional software or do anything more complex, but using the platform that they already have with the data that they've already been collecting. And SMART is widely used by protected areas worldwide. And there are some parks like Murchison Falls that have a lot of historical data that we can leverage for these kind of predictions. But there's other parks that are just kind of beginning patrols, so they don't have as much information yet. And this includes Royal Balloon State Park in Malaysia, which I was speaking with. And they were really interested in the work that we had done in Uganda and Cambodia previously, and wanted to develop more informed patrol planning as well. But when they shared their data, what we found was just a very small sample of observations. Over half of the park had never been patrolled at all, and it was just extremely sparse. So this was just not enough information to inform a machine learning model. But what that did tell us was we should focus on next as a research direction, recognizing that in parks that are more data rich, we can leverage this data to build predictive models for patrol planning. But for parks like Royal Balloon that are scarce in data, we have to think about how to conduct patrols to simultaneously detect poaching activity while also improving the predictive model. So this mirrors the exploration exploitation trade-off that is a paradigm of online learning. Which is a form of sequential decision making where we're proactively collecting more data over time. But in the act of us collecting data, that requires us acting. So it requires us like sending rangers out, and that means trading off sending rangers to areas where there's a lot of uncertainty in order to potentially improve future reward versus sending people to places where we already have a good understanding of poaching patterns and we know it's already high risk. Um, so really balancing this trade-off between like a myopic short-term reward versus like longer-term future reward. And in this paper, we've focused on how to better adapt online learning approach known as armed bandits to better suit this problem setting to reduce the amount of unnecessary exploration structure. So kind of like integrating like domain knowledge and expertise with and kind of encoding them as in mathematical representations to improve the ability of our model to learn. Um, and what I want to highlight here is this kind of use-inspired research where we're really trying to find a nice balance between kind of real-world problems versus uh, more practical machine learning approaches that haven't really been applied to these practical settings. So multi-armed bandits, for example, have been used a lot in digital contexts like recommender systems and like YouTube and Netflix recommendations. But uh, don't really work well in these kinds of like physical on the ground settings because the steps and the amount of data that we're able to collect is just drastically much smaller. So instead, we need to think about what are the forms of like adaptation that we can do in order to like make these types of decision-making approaches useful for these other contexts as well. And the advantage that gives us as researchers is it really kind of illuminates new research directions to focus on. And we were able to, in this paper, like integrate two different forms of multi-armed bandits. One that integrates smoothness in the reward function, known as Lipschitz continuity, with combinatorial structure in our actions in order to improve upon existing theoretical results so that we show that this is a new algorithm that actually does better than existing algorithms because of the unique structures of this problem setting. So this is just kind of trying to highlight some of the opportunities that we have as researchers to do this kind of like, use-inspired research that is also useful in illuminating new research directions to focus on. Okay. So from there, everything that we focused on so far has been trying to figure out how to predict general poaching patterns, but assuming that poaching patterns are like fairly consistent from month to month, they don't really change in response to our actions, but they only change in response to like seasonality or like features that we can directly measure. But in this setting, we can recognize that poachers are strategic people. They don't want to be caught, and they're pretty smart. So you can imagine that if we're patrolling an area intensely, the savvy poacher will stop going there and start moving somewhere else. So we were constantly asking ourselves this question of like, how do poachers respond to our patrols, and how do we plan proactively around this? Um, and we wanted to approach this problem with as rigorous analysis as we could. So ideally using causal inference, which is the gold standard. But causal inference is really hard to do in settings such as this, for two primary reasons. So one, we can't conduct a randomized control trial because the opportunity costs are very high. So if we were to ask uh, protected area manager, um, okay, these are substantive areas that we like don't want you to patrol for a period of a few weeks. They just wouldn't be able to like compromise those areas for the sake of a scientific experiment. Um, so instead of being able to conduct a new experiment in this context, we have to figure out a way to leverage existing observational data and be able to identify a causal effect here. So what we do is actually recognize that the field test that we had conducted back in 2018, where we were evaluating the predictive performance of our machine learning algorithm, that 5-month period of time where we were conducting this field test served as a shock to the setting where um, we were changing range of behavior for a very fixed period of time, and that served as a shock to the system. Um, so that we're able to look at for those 5 months which areas were patrolled more than usual and which areas were patrolled less than usual, and then use those as our treatment and control sites. And then we apply a number of statistical tools, including matching, to ensure that these groups of sites that were selected kind of are as similar as possible. So they have like identical patterns of poaching behavior. They have identical like historical patrol patterns. But just during this period of 5 months where we were changing poaching behavior, or we were changing ranger behavior, it changed for that period. And then afterwards, we can evaluate how the outcomes of poacher behavior differ between the treatment sites and control sites in order to estimate the causal effect. But then the second key challenge that we have to overcome in this context is that the question we're asking is how do ranger patrols impact poachers? But the outcome variable is poaching behavior, and that is not perfectly observable because we saw how difficult it is to observe snares. Um, and first of all, these parks are very, very large. So in a single month, rangers are only able to patrol about 8% of the park, which means 92% of the park is not patrolled in a single month. But then even for areas that we do patrol, if we find a snare, we know that it's a positive label, but if we don't find a snare, we can't be certain it's a true negative label because maybe, it's hidden behind a tree. Maybe we patrolled and poachers came there the next month, or sorry, the next day or something like that. So it's really hard to know anytime that we have a negative label how reliable it is. And what we do is develop a Bayesian inference technique to impute those missing outcome variables using as our heuristic the fact that the best indicator for how reliable a negative label is based on the amount of effort that rangers spent. So if we patrolled an area just a little bit, we just walked through and we didn't find poaching, then who really knows whether or not there is poaching. But if we patrolled much more intensely, then we still didn't find anything, we can be much more confident that's a true negative label. So that's what we do there. Um, and I also want to highlight the ways that machine learning can be integrated with causal inference. So as I mentioned, one of the big challenges here is that patrol effort is very sparse. So we only patrol about 8% of the park in a month. And here's examples from two consecutive months of a sample snapshot of ranger patrols. And you can see that like from month to month, the amount of patrol coverage is like very minimal. Most of the park is not covered, but also it just like changes extremely dramatically month after month. So there's not consistency in kind of where they go. So if we're trying to figure out, like, are they patrolling this area more or less this month compared to a typical month? It's really hard to define what a typical month means. Is it like, do we compare it to the month before? Do we compare it to, like the same month a year ago? It's really hard to understand like general patterns of patrol behavior. And due to the sparsity, poaching detections are also very sparse because we can only observe poaching in the areas that we patrol. So this means that setting up the causal inference problem is very difficult. So defining what the treatment group is hard, and defining like getting precise estimates of what our outcome variable is of poaching is also difficult. And here's where we can leverage machine learning to overcome this like sparse, noisy data, because machine learning enables us to build smooth estimates of general patterns of patrol effort and general patterns of poaching risk. Because instead of restricting ourselves to only a 1 month snapshot of data, we're able to leverage, 12 plus years of historical patrol data in order to understand general patterns. So like in a typical January, with these weather conditions and these climatic conditions, this is what the general expected amount of patrol effort would be and the general amount of poaching risk that we would believe to have. So machine learning enables us to estimate these kind of baseline values for business as usual, typical levels of patrol effort and poaching risk. And then we can look at the 5 month shock period to identify where the changes were and how it differs from these like general baseline patterns. And through this approach, we're able to provide the first causal evidence of deterrence in the context of poaching by integrating machine learning and causal inference to overcome noisy data and unobserved outcomes. And what we find is that in a typical month, for a typical site in Richland Falls, like with business as usual patrolling, there's about a 21% probability of poaching in the subsequent time step. But if we patrol an additional kilometer in that area, then the poaching probability decreases by about 45% to 12% probability of poaching. So this is a dramatic reduction in poaching probability. And the confidence interval is plus or minus about 15%. So this is about 30% to 60% reduction. And what we're very excited about is that this provides the first causal evidence of deterrence in this context, and it can be used by park managers to help justify to funders and policymakers that ranger patrols are really valuable, and it's something that we should continue to do and support. And we're hopeful that that this kind of work can help overcome the challenge of paper parks where the existing protected areas are just dramatically under-resourced. Okay. So what we've observed here is that poacher behavior really does respond to our actions. And what this tells us is that, environmental challenges, problems in nature recovery are really sequential problems. And to just visualize this abstractly, we have the environment. Here's like the current state of the world today. Our goal is to design some kind of intervention to bring us to like a better, state tomorrow. And the things that we might want to are things like animal density or ecosystem status. Um, and we want to, we can define some objective. Throw in terms that we're all familiar with here. We have the current state. We want to take some action to bring us to a better next state, defined in terms of our reward function. And you might recognize this as a Markov decision process, which is really like the core component of any kind of sequential decision-making problem. So nature recovery problems really are sequential planning problems. And many aspects of the AI methods that we talked about at the beginning are relevant here. So predictive machine learning, these kinds of monitoring tasks help us, identify what the state of the world is. So we can measure that, we get baselines, or we can observe changes. Um, Causal inference is useful to separate the impacts of our actions from just general changes are happening in the environment. So how to separate the impacts of our actions from just like the dynamic environment that we're operating in, where there's both, other humans intervening and just acting in the setting, but also where the environment is actually changing, species numbers and distributions and density are changing, climate is changing, all of these things are changing. Oh, and then reinforcement learning is the tool that enables us to solve markup decision processes in order to determine which actions should we take from a given state. But there are many challenges across all of these components that make it really hard to apply reinforcement learning to these problem settings. So this is where I see like a lot of research opportunities lie. And to just give an example from my own work about how to apply reinforcement learning for these types of environmental management problems, I'm focused on the challenge of robust planning. So what we've observed from Murchison Falls in Uganda is the presence of deterrence. So when we patrol an area more, poaching does change. Poachers will move away from that area and poach less in the future. So this means that we're in this sequential planning setting. So we might want to apply reinforcement learning, but RL is only good when we have a good model of the environment. But because our data is imperfect, if we have some estimate like in the site, poaching will be reduced by 17% if we patrol a certain amount. Um, but our data is like very, very imperfect. So we can't be too confident that this is a precise estimate, but instead might want to relax our estimate into some like uncertainty interval. So we could be much more confident in saying that this number will fall somewhere in between 12 and 23%. So this brings us to the world of robust planning, of making sure that we can design some policy that is guaranteed to perform well, regardless of where in this uncertainty interval that we fall. But at the same time, robust planning really increases the computational complexity of our decision making. So we also have to design policies that are tractable. What we focus on in this paper uh, is on introducing a new objective for reinforcement learning in robust planning, which is that of minimizing the maximum regret. And this objective has not been previously considered within reinforcement learning because it is a very computationally complex objective to solve for, with the key idea being that regret is defined with respect to whatever the optimal policy would be. But because we have this like this space, this uncertainty space, then every the optimal policy will change depending on like what the true environmental value would be. This means we have a lot of different policies that we would have to optimize against. And in order to more tractably solve this objective, we bring in approach integrating game theory to help us more efficiently search through this uncertainty space. So we set up this min-max planning problem as a two-player zero-sum game where there's a planner that's the minimization term, trying to learn a policy that will minimize regret given some environment setting. And then we have like an adversary that represents nature here, which is given a policy that we've committed to, it will find kind of like a worst case instantiation of this uncertain parameter that maximizes regret for us. So like makes our policy kind of as bad as possible. And then we'll iteratively go between the planner and nature in order to build up to just kind of like bring in one additional policy for each player to more efficiently search through this large continuous space of uncertainty. And what we show is that this approach will converge to a policy that is within epsilon of the optimal strategy within a finite number of steps. So we're able to more efficiently solve this planning problem. Um, okay, so I'm nearly at the end and just wanted to talk about like one more type of intervention that that focuses on a line of work that I have on public health, specifically in the context of maternal health care in India. But I believe there are very strong applications of this type of idea for environmental context as well. Um, so unfortunately, maternal mortality in India is very high, significantly higher than the US and Western Europe, and over double that of the UN Sustainable Growth Target. And tragically, many of these deaths are preventable if mothers just had like correct access to care. So what this nonprofit called Arman is focused on is connecting pregnant women with the kind of essential preventative care information that they need by developing this free program called Amitra, where women can enroll to receive free voice calls every week that contains a 2-minute voice recording of what they should be thinking about at their current stage of pregnancy. So it's like a reminder to take iron supplements or to make a certain doctor's appointment or watch out for signs of blood clotting and eat protein. Um, but the challenge is a lot of mothers will stop listening to these messages. So there's about 30% drop off in engagement, meaning that they're missing out on this important care information. So Arman also provides this intervention by sending community healthcare workers to provide individualized calls, checking in on these women, reminding them of the importance of this program, and just seeing how they're doing. But the challenge is in each cohort of the in-vitro program, there's about 20,000 women enrolled, but there's only a dozen or so healthcare workers. So they simply can't call everybody. And it's a question of determining who they should call at a given stage in order to maximize long-term program adherence over the course of this, like, year and a half long program. Um, and we set this up as a restless multi-armed bandit. And what a restless bandit is, I'll describe very simply. So we can model each mother in this program as like a mini MDP. So she can either be listening or not listening to messages at a given week. And there's some transition probabilities that she'll move from listening to not listening. And these transition probabilities depend on our actions. So if we act on her, if we intervene, with a service call, then she's more likely to go to the engaging state. And importantly, there's N different MDPs, one representing every mother in this program. So it's a very large scale planning problem. And our question is, which subset of these mothers should we call in a given week? So picking some K of these N mothers. And for restless bandits, the planning problem alone is very hard. Like even with like known transition probabilities, just solving this combinatorial optimization problem is very hard because of this sequential nature of the problem. And there's also the complexities, like we might have uncertainty in the transition probabilities. And I have a paper applying online learning to this context in order to learn transition probabilities over time. But one recent paper from iClear that this year that I wanted to highlight is addressing more complex constraints within restless bandits. So we think about this problem and think about like all the reasons that like mothers might stop listening. Um, she might stop listening because the time just didn't work for her. So now this tells us that we have to think about this problem, not just in terms of, identifying, okay, these are the K mothers that we should call, but recognizing that each healthcare worker has a certain set of availabilities, and mothers might also have their own availabilities. So we have to do this matching between healthcare workers and mothers where that have compatible schedules. Or we can imagine that there's many different languages and dialects that are spoken in India, and perhaps mothers are most comfortable with people that come from their own communities, speak the same dialect or speak the same language. So now we have certain capacities of different healthcare workers who speak a specific language. Um, and we have to allocate these more kind of like constrained resources. Um, and another example is if we want to do slightly more intensive interventions by instead of doing a phone call to check in on them, we actually do an at-home visit. But what this means is that our budget constraint is not just some K number of phone calls that we can make, but it's rather constrained by the overall distance that we're able to travel in a given week. So now we have to think about this as a routing problem of trying to like find a pathway for healthcare workers that minimizes transportation time or cost. Um, what all of these constraints have in common is that they are all NP-hard combinatorial optimization problems. So how do we reconcile the computational complexity of these problems with the very hard restless bandit planning problem?
It seems, Lily, it seems like we've
Hello?
lost. I think you lost the connection, but perhaps you're back now.
Okay. Okay. Oh, sorry. Um, okay. Maybe I'll just
It
like
was
talk.
it was empty for about 30 seconds, perhaps.
That. Okay. Sorry about that.
You were talking
I'm on.
about the three NP hard optimization problems.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. So all three of these problems are now MD-hard combinatorial optimization problems, and trying to figure out how can we, tractably solve this to better allocate our limited resources. So in our iClear 2025 paper, we integrate deep reinforcement.
Uh, do you guys hear
Wanted
Lily?
to.
No,
Oh,
but when you start talking, Olaf, it seems like she's back, so to say, after that.
Oh, really? When I it's
uh,
so let's assume that that's just a correlation and not a causation. Uh,
okay.
but
I'm very
you're
sorry.
back now, Lily.
Okay, I'm very sorry. I'm on university Wi-Fi.
Okay,
I, um, uh, this is my last slide, anyways. So
yeah,
maybe I'll just wrap it up.
sure.
So what I wanted to just kind of close off with is talking about like the opportunities, to really apply other methods within AI, really focus on like planning and this kind of like work that's a little bit more downstream of, now that we've like done this work in monitoring, like of all the like, data that we already have collected, how can we best leverage this to plan more effective downstream interventions? And the kind of for broad types of interventions that I see to be really relevant are optimal monitoring. So how can we, most effectively, where should we place more sensors? Where should we send people out to collect more data? To inform decision making because monitoring always comes at a cost. Large scale planning that includes robust optimization, planning within dynamic settings, and think about strategic interventions, recognizing that we have self interested agents. So that's using a lot of ideas from economics and game theory. So yes, my work is really focused on AI decision making for nature recovery. I think about these opportunities beyond monitoring. There's a lot that we need in order to do these types of planning work more efficiently. So, we need quantification in order to do robust planning. We need behavioral models to understand how humans respond. We need mechanistic models in order to be able to model things as MVPs, for example. Um, So yeah, I just wanted to close off by thanking my collaborators and thank you all for the invitation. And yeah, happy to discuss anything.
Thank you, Lily. Such amazing work, and so many important and interesting problems that you're working on. Um, so please, everybody, if you have questions, bring them up. And while you think about your questions, I can perhaps ask a couple of questions myself. Um, I'm thinking in the modeling of the poaching problem, what kind of how does the data look like? What kind of features do you have in your models, for
Yeah,
example?
so the features are both like about human it's all features like related to the landscape. So for each like a data point corresponds with like a physical region, like a parcel of land, and that land is associated with information about the landscape. So, what is the elevation? Like how much water is in the area? How close are we to the nearest river? If we have information about kind of animal of species distribution, we can add that in. But a lot of these parks don't have these estimates. We also have information about human infrastructure. So we know like how close are we to the nearest road or villages or patrol post, um, all of that. So those are factors that we think will be correlated with poaching risk and also will is also correlated with where animals are, which thereby determines poaching risk.
Interesting. Could there be like insights in sort of the minds of the poachers in like that you can incorporate in some way for this, or
Yeah.
is that how you've been working with this?
What we've done in terms of like integrating like those insights is mostly just kind of like doing feature selection. So, for example, like in talking with Shupak Wildlife Sanctuary in Cambodia, they pointed out that poachers will oftentimes like go out for several days at a time within a park, and then they kind of like set up camp and find a place to stay. And as a result, they need to be close to a water source, which indicated to us that water holes were really important. So we like added that in as an additional feature. Um, because we recognize like okay it first of all like waterfalls are important because they kind of constrain where folks are able to camp and spend more time, but then also animal many of the animals that they're searching for require will congregate at salt licks. So certain ungulate species for example will like go to like a salty water source, and what poachers actually do is they will kind of identify like a animal water hole or salt lake or something like that, find some tall grass, and then make a trail that will, then incentivize animals like, okay, it's much easier to walk down this path. I'm going to go down here, but then place a trap like in the middle of that path that they've created. So they're really kind of like funneling animals in and kind of luring them. So those are kind of insights that came from conversations with rangers to about kind of what drives poacher behavior and trying to figure out, how can we like is there information to be able to integrate that into our models?
Thank you.
I have a question as well. Thank you, Lily, for a really interesting talk. So it's really interesting and inspiring to see so many examples of like real world problems that you're tackling with machine learning. And like, for example, the last that you mentioned at iClear 2025. And my question is a little bit about machine learning research in general and like tying that to applications. So there's like increasing need for more applications-driven machine learning. There's even a position paper that you might have seen from Rolnick and others titled like application-driven innovation in ML. And like, do you have some insights to share about how to, as a researcher that both has to publish, sometimes at the top tier venues with generic
Yeah.
machine learning versus having the real world attachment. So do you have any just thoughts on advice regarding this intersection?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, I see it as kind of like, there's two. They're kind of orthogonal in some ways. So, sometimes the things that like really have impact are like let's say it's this axis and the other axis is like methodological novelty, the things that will actually be accepted at a top tier machine learning venue. Um, and the work that we can do falls somewhere like in the intersection of that space. But some of the work that we're going to do is purely going to be methodological, and this is the kind of currency that we need as academics. And then some of the work that we do, where we're like engineering a system that can then be used by like downstream users, like that has no value for research as like a new research contribution, but has a lot of real world impact. So that's something that will fall directly on that axis. But then kind of over time, as you like become more immersed in a problem and you like enrich the methodology that you have, you'll be able to do work that's like, falls like a little bit more of this intersection. You'll like understand like, more about like what problems are actually practical and relevant for these contexts and where does that, relate to like the academic frontier in terms of like what methods currently exist. So then the goal is like always to like be moving further along, like along these kind of Pareto frontiers. In that direction, but also recognizing that, it's okay to sometimes have work that's like, purely methodological without, immediate application, or work that, is spending some time on things that are like just kind of more deployment or like impact oriented. And I think that we're seeing an increasing number of like academic positions or like research groups and whatnot that are, about like environmental data science or the really just like valuing the kind of like real world impact of machine learning and recognizing that uh, that there's a lot of like novelty and like scientific advances that can be made like through the unique blend of computer science tools with like more grounded settings, whether that's kind of like AI for science, AI for ecology, AI for scientific discovery, all of those things. So I think there is, a lot of value in still investing in those kinds of problems if those are things you care about. And I think the trend is just increasingly more so that it's being valued.
Yeah, thank you very much for those
Yeah.
insights.
Thank you. So I think if we have a quick question from the audience, we can take it before we wrap up this seminar. I have a real quick one. So you were talking about the sort of the you were talking about revisiting a place for negative samples of poaching, like when you detect that there hasn't been a trap in a place. If you revisit it, you sort of you give it a higher score or something.
Mhm.
Is that is that is that all you do, like changing the score, or is it like you're really sort of changing the policy of the rangers so that they actually go to these places more to actually revisit it?
Yes. So Wh- uh, when we're thinking about well, like where I referenced that was in the work that we did on causal inference to try to estimate like what is actual prevalence of poaching, given that there's uncertainty in our negative labels. Um, and what we do there is like we learn through machine learning the relationship between the amount of patrol effort and the probability of detecting poaching. And you can kind of expect that this function is going to be monotonically like non-decreasing. So as you patrol more, we're only going to be like more likely to find a snare. But what we observe is that there's like a point at which this plateaus. So kind of at a certain point, like if there's going to be a snare, we've like most likely found it by now. Like if we keep patrolling, like we're not going to be likely to find it in the future. So then what we do is to kind of get these like counterfactual labels of what is like true presence, what is the true poaching outcome. We look at for a site that we patrolled after the field test. So this is in like the outcomes period. Did we observe a snare? If we did, then we're confident, it's just a positive label. We know that to be true. But if we didn't observe poaching, then we look at kind of how much effort we spent, and then we'll update our estimate of how confident we are that it's a zero accordingly. So if we patrolled very intensely, we can say it's a zero. If we patrol only a little bit, maybe it's going to be like 0.3 or 0.25 or something like that. But this is like based off a model that's learned from the historical data. So now the inputs that go into that model are like the features of a data point of a parcel of land, and as well as patrol effort. So we're like learning the relationship between poaching probability and patrol effort for every region of the park.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for this really super interesting talk. Really interesting both methodologically and application-wise. With this, we will take a break for summer. Tomorrow is the sort of the holiest day in Sweden. It's really not holy at all, but it's the midsummer. So this will mark the end of this term's learning machines. And then we'll be back August 28th. We'll have a talk by Marcus Pettersson, who is a PhD student at Chalmers University of Technology. He'll talk about debiasing AI predictions for causal inference without fresh ground truth data. So with this said, thank you so much, especially Lily Chu, and see you again in August.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Enjoy. Happy midsummer.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Bye.